In those chaotic years just after the cataclysm, when the frightened citizens of Exec-Tazara were fleeing their beloved but decimated city, there was among them a certain half-elf by the name of Avril Whirlwind, who, while others sought only refuge, took to roaming the countryside, carrying upon his bent back a huge black tome. Even without his peculiar burden, which he held by a leather strap thrown across one shoulder, Avril Whirlwind was, as far as half elves went, a strange one. But he was probably tall and willowy, and he had fair hair, pale skin, blue eyes, typical of his kind. He seemed not at all interested in his appearance, and had indeed a slovenliness about him. His shoes were often unbuckled, his shirt hung out his pants, and his hair was usually a tangle. He often went days without shaving, so that fine blonde hairs covered his jaw like down. In addition to everything else, he wore thick metal rimmed eyeglasses. All this, though, had a simple enough explanation. Avril Whirlwind was, by his own definition, an academic. More particularly, he was one of the many itinerant folklorists who appeared on Kryn just after the cataclysm. The cataclysm threatens to extinguish our rich past, he would explain in his gentle but enthusiastic voice, to whoever gave him a moment of time, and if peace should ever again come to Kryn, we will want to know something of our traditions before everything is destroyed. But this is not time to do it. Often came the curt response from some fleeting traveller, sometimes with everything he owned in a wagon or a dog cart or even upon his back, his family often in tow. But this is exactly the time to do it, returned Avril Whirlwind automatically, before too much is forgotten by the corrupt sweep of events. Well, good luck with that then. Well, good luck to you then, would as likely be the answer as the party hurried off to some helpful, safer corner of Kryn. Undaunted, Avril Whirlwind crisscrossed the countryside, traversing shadowy villages, sunlit fields, and sombre forests. He stopped at the occasional surviving inn, passed through refuge encampments, and even marched along with armies, all the time asking who asking whomever he met if he or she would know a story that he could put in his big black book. In time, it became clear to Avril that he usually had the best luck with the older folks. Indeed, the older the better. These grey hairs were not only the most likely to remember a story or two, but they were the ones most likely to be interested in retelling it. Perhaps it was because they welcomed the opportunity to slow down the reminiscence a while, or perhaps it was because they had not much of a figure to give to Kryn, only their pasts. In any case, Avril Whirlwind soon learned to seek them out almost exclusively, and his book slowly began to fill with stories from before the cataclysm. When Kryn had been in what he considered its golden age, he gave every story an appropriate title. Then he gave due credit to source by adding, as told by Henrik Hellendale, a dwarven baker, or told by Veriel Stragzer, an elvish shepherd, or, as told by Frederick Ashfeld, a human woodchopper, and so forth. People often ask Avril what his favourite story was, but with the professional objectivity proper to an academic, he'd said only, I like them all. But really, if you could read his mind, there was a favourite, and that was one, as told by Ban Warex, a Solomonic knight. It had been on a particularly lovely spring day, a day indeed when all the nature seemed happy and unconcerned, and the political upheavals miles away. When Arrow was travelling the length of the grassy and flowery dotted valley, I spied a knight, kneeling at the base of a vale wall. A knight, as luck would have it, was an old one. Perfect, murmured Arrow. To himself, he strode towards the grand man, stopping several paces away. At first, the old knight didn't seem to realise he had an audience. He simply continued his kneeling, his head bowed in either deep meditation or perhaps even in respectful prayer to his recently disposed gods of Krynn. Because he was low, rocky, overhanging, almost a cave really, which was apparently serving as a humble and temporary shelter. The order of the Solamnic Knights, you see, had been destroyed in the cataclysm and fallen into disrepute, its few remaining members scattered by the four winds. It seemed to Arrow Whirlwind that such events must have taken a truly terrible toll on this fellow, making him look even older than he was, for he was drawn, haggard-faced, his hair though thick, was totally white, and his hands clenched before him were gnarled, almost arthritic. Still, Arrow could see much in the man that boasted of an old grandeur of his order. He was dressed in his full plate armour, a great sword hanging at his side, his viscerless helmet and shield resting nearby on a flat rock. And though he was kneeling, he did seem to be quite tall, that is, long of limb. But what impressed Avril Whirlwind the most was his truly capacious moustache, a long white one that dropped with a poignant flourish so that its tips nearly brushed the ground as he knelt there. A lot of pride must have gone into that moustache, mused Avril as he waited patiently for the knights to finish whatever he was doing. Now all that time, the itinerant folklorish thought he was unobserved, so that he was startled when the knight not so much as lifted his head or moving a muscle, spoke up in a deep, tough voice, in a deep, tough, tired voice. What do you want? Oh, pardon, said Avril Whirlwind, stepping ahead, bent forward as if he was bowing, though in fact he was merely carrying his own tone. I don't mean to interrupt anything, only if you are done, I would like to speak with you. I am in meditation. So you are, but perhaps you could return it in a moment, suggested Arrow. This will not take long. The old knight sighed deeply. Actually, you're not interrupting much, he said, his body slumping from the disciplined pose. I no longer have the concentration I once did. Then we can talk. The knight began to raise to his feet, though it clearly took some effort. Ah, it's getting so I can't distinguish between the creaking of my armour and the creaking of my bones. I believe it was your armour that time, said Arrow with a smile. At his full height, the knight indeed proved to be a very tall man, as tall as Arrow, who herself, when he did not carry his book, was a gangly fellow, and when the knights faced him fully, Arrow got goosebumps because engraved upon the knight's tarnished breastplate was a faint rose, the famous symbol of his order. On one hand, I do not feel much like talking, said the knight sullenly, walking past the half-elf and seating himself upon the large rock, where he leaned back against another and gazed languidly up at the blue sky and white clouds, bracketed by the opposing walls of the valley. I'm a man of action. I quite understand, said Avril, following, but it does seem to me you are at the moment between actions. The thing is, I'm a folklorist, Avril Whirlwind. Yes, that's right. You've heard of me. I'm flattered. The knight squinted as the gangly blonde person with the large book up on his back. You are indeed a strange one. It takes all kinds, said Avril Whirlwind again, with a smile. In any case, you know why I'm here. I do not wish to talk. Oh, but you must make yourself. A knight such as you surely has many wonderful tales of daring do bravery. Why, this may be one of your few opportunities to set the record straight about your order before the world forgets. The knight appeared unmoved at first, but then, despite himself, he tugged contemptuously at the tip of his long moustache. Perhaps, he said slowly, if I do think about it. Yes, do think about it, said Avril Whirlwind, as he hurried to another smaller rock, where he sat down, his bony knees pulled up, and brought forth his book and propped it open on his legs. He then took from his pouch a quill and inkwell, placing the inkwell on the ground. You're a pushy one, said the knight, arching an imperious elbow. These days, a folklorist must be, said Avril now and then. First things first, what's your name? Raxon. Warax, said the knight, growing ever more interested. He even sat up. Baron Warax. Is Warax spelled with one R or two? Two. Fine. Now, what do you have for me? Some tale, I bet, of epic battles and falling castles, or heroic missions? Nope, said the knight thoughtfully, again pulling on his moustache. Nope, I don't think so. Ah, then perhaps a tale of minotaur slaying or a duel with a fierce ogre. No, none of those either. Though I've done both. Then by all means, you must tell them, people. One day, we'll want to read such knightly adventures. Please, snapped Baron Warwick, the old milky eyes flashing with anger. I have no patience for these unless you will listen to the story that I'm wanting to tell. Of course, said Arrow, closing his eyes in contrition. Forgive me. That is, of course, just what I want you to do. To a Solomnic knight, at least, to this old Solomnic knight, there is one thing as important, more important than even bravery, duty, or honour. More important? My, and what would that be? Love. A tale of love. Well, that's good too, said Harold Whirlwind, nodding his approval and dripping his quill into the inkwell. A knight's tale of chivalry. I did not say chivalry, snarled Brian Warwick. Pardon me, I just assumed. Stop assuming, will you? This is a tale told to me when I was a mere child long before I ever thought of becoming a knight. And though much has happened to me since, the tale has stayed with me all these years. Indeed, these days, it aches my heart more than ever. Harold was already scribbling in his book. More than ever, he repeated as he wrote. More than ever, he repeated as he wrote. Brian Warwick settled back once more, calming himself. It is about 2 entwined trees in the forest of Wereth. The entwining trees. A tale of love. Well, that's good too, said Harold Whirlwind, nodding his approval and dipping his quill in the inkwell. A knight's tale of chivalry. I did not say chivalry. I did not say chivalry, snarled Baron Warwick. Pardon me, I just assumed. Stop assuming, will you? This is a tale told to me when I was a mere child, long before I ever thought of becoming a knight. And though much has happened to me since, the tale has stayed with me all these years. Indeed, these days, it aches my heart more than ever. Harold was already scribbling in his book. More than ever, he repeated as he wrote. Baron Warwick settled back once more, calming himself. It is about two entwined trees in the forest of Wereth. The entwining trees interrupted Harold, lifting his pert nose from his book and pushing his sleeping glasses back with his forefinger. I've heard of them. You know their story. I do, returned Warwick, trying to stay calmer indeed. By Garulius, my Garulius friend, I intend to tell it you if you would, but be quite long enough. I intend to tell you if you would be quite long enough. Forgive me. It's just that this is exactly the sort of story I look for. The entwining trees, yes. Do go ahead, please. I won't say another word. The knight looked at Harold Whirlwind in disbelief. But sure enough, as he had promised, the bespectacled half-elf said nothing further. He only hunched over his book. Quill at the ready. Satisfied, Baron Warwick rested his head back. An old change came over him. His eyes glanced over with a distant look, as if they were seeing something many years ago. His ears perked as if they were like wise hearing a voice from long ago. And when he spoke, it seemed to be in the voice of someone else, so very long ago. Once, when the world was younger, there lived in a small trench cottage on the outskirts of Gateway. The cottages were a stone's throw from each other. A certain widower by the name of Aaron Dewey, a weaver by trade, and his younger daughter, Petal, who was considered, if not the most beautiful, then certainly among the most beautiful human girls for miles in any direction. Petal was slender and delicate, with a long elegant neck, large brown eyes, and long fair hair, and reached her narrow waist. It came as no surprise then that when Petal reached marriageable age, she found at her doorstep every young bachelor who was looking for a wife. These fellows would wander by the front fence, sometimes pretending to be going on a stroll. They'd by chance notice the young girl gardening in her front yard, and they began chatting with her. Why, hello, they'd say, for instance. What lovely roses you have. Naturally, Petal was flattered to receive so much attention, and she'd leave her gardening and go flirt with the young men, which only encouraged them. Now Aaron, though he had always been the kindest and happiest of the fathers of Petal, was growing up, turning stern and dark in expression. He stopped smiling and grumbled a lot. He became, in a word, jealous. True, he tried at first to view the situation with pleasure. After all, the attention she was receiving was that due to a young, beautiful, marriageable girl, and he tried to pretend that he was prepared for it, but he couldn't help himself. Whenever one of Petal's would-be suitors came calling at the front fence, offering Aaron to wave her an hello, Aaron Dewey could only grunt back, or more likely ignore the young man and stalk into his cottage. Several neighbours told him, "Look, Aaron, you can't keep nature from taking its course." Aaron listened politely, but that was because his neighbours were also customers for his weaving rally. Really, he didn't give a damn about nature or its course or their opinions. He just couldn't bear the thought of some swine taking away his only precious daughter. As far as he was concerned, no matter how old she got, Petal would always be the little girl who laughed and squeaked and bounced her lightly on his knee. So he said, "Dash it all, I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't like what's happening." And he took to chasing off the young men with a knobby walking stick and kept handy near his loom. "Stay away," he would cry, as he came running out of his cottage towards the fence. The young man of the moment, startled by the attack, would leave Patel standing by the gate and flee, and tell your boorish friends to stay clear too. Patel was always very embarrassed by the display. "Daddy, why can't they just visit me?" she'd ask, her tears. "I'm old enough." Because, answered Aaron, his face red, his knuckles white as he clenched his walking stick. Just because. And then he'd storm back into the cottage. Well, because wasn't good enough for Petal, and she continued to encourage her suitors. A wink from her was enough to draw them back like bees to a bright, fragrant flower, though none of them dared actually enter the gates. From his loom, which incidentally was a clever, if noisy contraption, operated by various levers and pedals, the strewn weaver could look out his window and see the way his daughter was behaving, and he saw the effect of it on her callers, who were growing even bolder, some even venturing to open the gate. Apparently, waving a stick at them was no longer enough to drive them away, which was just as well, since Aaron was getting tired of running out of other moments. So finally, he decided there was only one thing left to do. He would have to take Petal away from the gateway. This he did. He piled his loom with other possessions high on a wagon, then Petal on the seat next to him, and off they went, pulled by a tired old ox which he borrowed from a neighbour. Petal sighed deeply as she waved farewell to all the would-be lovers, who lined up the side of the road in front of their own cottage to see her off. They waved back, their hearts heavy. Aaron took Petal far away. The road became unpaved and overgrown, and eventually it led to the forest of Wayreth. There, Aaron had to leave behind most of his possessions for the time being because there was no path between the trees wide enough to allow a wagon to pass. He would have to make several trips, but he loaded up his goods on his back, took Petal by her slender hand, and off they went through the sunless forest. When he had gone far enough, that is to say, when he became too exhausted to continue, Aaron put down his load and said, here is where we shall live. And right on that bosky spot, he bent a new cottage of sticks to thatch. He included a small room for Petal, a larger one for himself, and still bigger one for the cooking hearth, table, chairs, and of course his loom, which he had which he had the ox drag through the forest before he turned the beast to its owner. Convinced at last that his daughter was now where no young man would find her, or at least where she'd be too far away to be worth bothering, Aaron resumed his weaving. Such a location among reputable magical woods was inconvenient for him, for he had to make long trips to his customer's gateway. But it was worth the peace of mind that came from knowing that his daughter was safe from anyone who would dare try to take her from him. As for Petal, she cried for days and days. She wanted to go back to Gateway. She wanted to flirt with her suitors. But Aaron said, "You'll get used to it here. Soon things will be back to the way they were before all this foolishness started." Petal did in fact stop crying, but things never quite went back to the way they were. Petal was lonely and she never looked happy. "What's the matter?" Aaron finally snapped one day from his loom while Petal, long-faced and sprinkling favourite pine needles on the floor. "I was good enough company all these years." "Oh, father," said Petal, pushing in her work, her eyes watering. "I still love you, but my father, now it's time I loved another as my husband." "Nonsense," said Aaron with a wave of his hand. "There'll be plenty of time for that when I'm dead." "Don't talk that way," said Petal, stepping forward, her father dropping the rest of his pine needles. "What way? One day I'll be gone, and then you'll be able to entertain all the young men you want. And with that, one day I'll be gone, and then you'll be able to entertain all the young men you want." And with that, Aaron turned back to his daughter and continued his weaving. The arguments usually went away, and they always broke Petal's heart. Finally, she stopped bringing up the subject, which was lost, which was what Aaron wanted. Anyway, these days settled into a routine. Aaron worked methodically and consistently at his loom, and Petal touched the cottage of the garden. Aaron ran outside into the benighted woods, where only sprinkles of silver moonlight fell upon the canopy and broke up the dark forest floor. The way Patel's pine needles broke up the cottage floor. Petal, Petal, there was no answer, except for the hoot of a lone, unseen owl. Tweet-twoo! All the rest of the night, Aaron scrambled about the dark woods, calling his daughter's name and brushing himself, as he hit his head on the low limbs and banged fully unseen into the tree trunks. By the time the sun rose, sending its early morning rays of light, the misty air, and awakened the birds, who promptly began their warbling, Aaron was ready to faint with exhaustion. He had been searching and calling all night, dwarfed and heartbroken, but determined to march to Gateway to fetch his daughter if need be. He trudged to the cottage and got his stick. Yet when he got there, whom did he find, sleeping curled up on a bed, as innocently as a doe, but Petal. Aaron rubbed his swollen eyes. His heart soared with joy. Was it possible, in his great concern, that he had missed her sleeping there the night before? Everything was as it was supposed to be, except, Aaron noted, that there were little puddles of water, footprints really, leading up to Petal's bed. This was curious, but Aaron didn't give it much thought. He was happy to have his daughter back. He told himself he would try to be nicer to her from then on, for the last thing we want was to drive her away. That morning, when his daughter awoke, Aaron acted more chipper at the breakfast table. Petal was surprised by his new demeanour, but she welcomed it. She too was happier, you see, said Aaron as he sipped his tea. Do you see how easy it is for us to be friends? Yes, father, said Petal. She nibbled at her muffin. Forgive me for my pouting. No, no, it was I who asked for forgiveness. I've been an ogre. Only because you love me, I know that now. Aaron reached over and patted his daughter's soft fair hair, which felt strangely a little damp. Again, he gave this little thought. For the rest of the day, he whistled he whistled at the loom while Petal hummed in her front garden, which actually wasn't growing as well in the constant shade of the woods as it had in Gateway. In any case, for all this outward pleasantness, Aaron, that was very that very night tossed and turned uncomfortably in his bed, certain once more that his daughter had indeed disappeared the previous night, and those puddles popped into his mind, perplexing him. It was no use. Aaron jumped out of bed. He had to check on his daughter, but he didn't want her to know, for then she'd be truly angry with him. So he tiptoed ever so quietly to her room. She was gone. Aaron grew frantic. He bolted out of the cottage, but before he could call his daughter's name, he saw in the moonlight that, sprinkling through the tree cover, Petal herself, dressed in her flowing white gown, just disappeared silently between two enormous tulip trees. Again, Aaron was about to call to her, but he stopped himself. He was meeting someone. He had to know. He decided to follow and catch her in the act. He rushed back to his cottage, grabbed his stick, and hurried out to catch his daughter. He passed between the two tulip trees and found himself on the path, one that he had not even known existed. It was narrow, virtually covered with fern fronds, but it was illuminated clearly by the full moon, for there was a slit in the tree canopy that followed the path exactly. Aaron failed to see his daughter, but he walked along the bending path, confident it would take him to her, using his walking stick for its intended purpose. Aaron failed to see his daughter, but he walked along the bending path, confident it would take him to her. Using his walking stick for its intended purpose, he proceeded as quickly as he could without making too much noise. All around him, just a step away to his right and left, he proceeded as quickly as he could without making too much noise. All around him, just a step away to his right and left, was the gloomy forest. Only only those trees nearest the path were partly lit, their dark and grey trunks marking the way. Behind them, the trees were casting shadow, and farther from the path still, the trees were in total blackness. The croaking of frogs grew louder, and soon he came to a small glade in the middle of which was a pond. Petal was standing on its bank near the old beaver dam, her long white gown bathed in the sky's ghostly light. For several moments she did nothing but gaze at the black water, upon whose surface floated many lily ponds and white blossoms open to the moonshine. Then she softly called, my love, take me to your home." At that, some of the lily pads were jostled from beneath. Petal then slipped off her gown and stepped into the water. She waded towards the centre of the pond, pressing past some lily pads. The water rose steadily up her slender legs, reaching her narrow waist, and continued to rise as she went forward. Aaron was confused as to what was happening, but when he saw his daughter in the pond, up to her delicate neck, her fair hair floating behind her, he burst from his hiding place. around him, just a step away to his left and right, was the gloomy forest. All around him, just a step away to his left or right, was the gloomy forest. Only these trees nearest the path were partly lit, their dark and grey trunks marking his way. Behind him, the trees were casting shadow, and farther from the path still, the trees were in total darkness. Further from the path still, the trees were in total blackness. The croaking of frogs grew louder, and soon he came to a small glade, in the middle of which was a pond. Petal was standing on the bank near an old beaver dam, her long white gown bathed in the sky's ghostly light. For several months she did nothing but gaze at the black water upon whose surface floated many lit pads. Their white blossoms upon the moonshine. Then she softly called, my love, take me to your home." At that, some of the lily pads were jostled from beneath. Petal then slipped off her gown and stepped into the water. She faded towards the centre of the pond, pressing past some lily pads. The water rose steadily upon her slender legs, reaching her narrow waist, and continued to rise as she went forward. Aaron was confused to see what was happening, but when he saw his daughter in the pond up to her delicate neck, her fair hair floated behind him, he burst from his hiding place. It was too late. Petal's head dipped below the surface, her hair floating momentarily, then it too vanished below. "Petal, what are you doing?" cried Aaron. "Petal!" He ran back and forth along the shore as he squinted and tried to peer into the inky water, but he saw only the round white moon above and his dark eyes silhouetted gazing upon him. Finally he jumped in. The water was cold and black, and he couldn't see a thing. He came up from the air, then dove even deeper, grabbing blindly at the water, rippling at lily pad stems, and smacking a few startled fish. But after becoming so tired that he nearly drowned, Aaron finally pulled himself onto the bank and collapsed. There he slept, his legs and arms twitching as if he were still diving, until he was awakened by the morning sun and the warbling of birds. Convinced that his daughter had drowned, Aaron mulled over the idea of taking his own life as he returned to the cottage. But lo and behold, who did he find there? Once more curled up in a bed as if nothing had happened, but Petal. Aaron shook his head. He was almost ready to believe he had dreamed the whole adventure, except that once more he saw puddles on the floor leading to his daughter's bed. Though he was overjoyed, Aaron was also furious. He was about to shake his daughter wide awake and demand an explanation when he decided, no, let her confess it to me on her own. Wouldn't it be better that way? But confess what exactly? That she had gone for a midnight swim? Surely that's all there was to it. Surely there was no one in the pond waiting for her. Still, in the forest of Wayreth, you never know. So all that day, Aaron waited for his daughter to tell him what had happened. From his loom, he kept eyeing her, but all she did was go happily about her duties. Fine, fine, thought Aaron in frustration. Let her think she's fooled an old man. I will just have to catch her up. I will just have to catch her in the act. For the rest of the day, Aaron played the innocent too. He smiled at his daughter, engaged her in polite conversation during lunch and dinner, and generally acted as if nothing were on his mind, except that while his loom, he was busy weaving a plot. Then in the evening, earlier that evening, he said, I'm tired. I think I'll just turn in. Petal, darning in a rocky chair near the fire, said, All right, father, I'll put out the fire. Aaron stretched a phony stretch and went to his room, but he had never been more awake. He crouched by his bedroom window and peered out into the night air, waiting for his daughter to leave the cottage. He waited so long though that he nodded off for a moment. When he stirred himself, he hurried into Patel's room and saw that she was left, nearly panic-stricken that he had lost an opportunity. Aaron grabbed his stick, a lantern and a net, and he hurried outside and passed between the two tulip trees. By the time he reached the pond, Petal was already standing on its banks and calling towards the abandoned beaver dam. My love, take me to your home. Then he slipped off his gown and stepped into the water. Aaron waited. He wanted to catch both Petal and whoever it was with her. When the water reached Petal's neck, her long fair hair floated behind her. Aaron sprang out and tossed the net across the water, but Petal dropped below too quickly, and Aaron pulled in only a turtle and 2 frogs. He quickly lit the lantern and held it over the water. Then what he saw below horrified him. Just beneath the surface, but sinking ever deeper, was a pale form of Petal, hand in hand with another being, a shadowy creature made indistinct by both night and water. Aaron pressed so close to the water to see that his nose and lantern went under the flame, extinguishing with a hiss. The 2 forms disappeared. Aaron pulled back and sat on the bank near his daughter's gown. When he took in his hand, his heart was pounding, but this time he would remain calm. He fully expected Petal to return, and this time he would be waiting for her. He stabbed at the dam. He stabbed at the dam repeatedly, prying it, pulling out the limbs, branches, and mud. The water rushed on each side of the bank, swelling the stream on the other side. The pond itself slowly began to shrink, leaving behind the winding shore the mud that was laced with stranding lily pads and their own limp stems. Several frogs, left high and dry, began burrowing by backing into the mud. The bulbous eye disappeared last with a blink. His heart pounded ever faster. Aaron worked all the harder. Come, come, he called out over the increasingly loud rush of water. Don't be silly. Let me see your fishy face. He pulled down the sticks and eagerly held his lantern over the surface. He was rewarded for his efforts. He saw swimming among an even thicker rot of fish, a large human shape, something no too human shape, something both still vague and muddy, benign water. For a moment, one of them seemed to be the pale form of Petal, and Aaron had to remind himself that he had secured her in her room. He was tempted to run back to the cottage just to make sure, but the water was very low and he would see everything soon enough. Finally, though, the water dropped to the depths of a mere handspan and the fish were bumping into each other, many of them forced out and flopping about in the muddy shore. Two creatures began joining the frogs and burrowing in the mud. No, where are you going? Cried Aaron, stepping forward, his foot sinking into the mud with a slurp. But the two forms burrowed deeper, even as the pond became only a mud hole, leaving behind the mere trickle of a stream that mended among the straddled lily pads, flopping fish, and stunned turtles, which just stood there stupidly, not knowing which way to go. In the centre of all was the whirling mud. As the two creatures dug down to escape the lantern light of the air of Aaron himself. Eventually, the writhing slowed and the mounds flattened, and the ground was still. All was quiet. Even the fish lay exhausted, their gills opening and closing uselessly. Aaron felt cheated not to see the face of the creature whom Petal had called my love, but he was satisfied that it would be a problem no more. But who was the second creature? Aaron returned quickly to his cottage. The first thing checked Petal's room. He saw to his relief that she was indeed curled up in her bed, so he went to bed himself and slept more peacefully than he had in a long time. The next morning he awoke and went directly to his loom, waiting for Petal to rise and make him some breakfast. But she slept late that morning. Finally, his stomach rumbling, Aaron called out, Petal, come to make your father some breakfast. She didn't answer. Perhaps she knows what I did is being spiteful, thought Aaron. Come on, girl, up. She didn't answer. Aaron went to her room and found her still lying in her bed, curled up. Naturally, there was no puddles this morning, a fact that gave Aaron much satisfaction. Up, my girl, he called, walking over to her and brashly pulling away the covers. His eyes nearly popped out of his head. It was not pleat at all, but pillows set to mimic her from. Without a moment's hesitation, Aaron dashed from the room, grabbed one of Patel's large gardening shovels, and ran up to the dry pond. When he got there, he saw what, in his eagerness, he had missed the night before. His daughter's gown lying rumpled on the bank. He immediately stepped onto the mud to get to the centre, but the farther he went, the deeper his legs went into the mud. At one point, the mud came nearly to his knees, and he could hardly walk. But he pressed on, thinking oddly of his darling Petal lying buried in the mud. Then, as he neared the centre of the pond, Aaron noticed something odd. There, right there, he meant to dig, was a tiny green plant shoot, or rather two tiny green plant shoots. They were entwined delicately about each other, and before Aaron could pull his right leg from the mud, those two green shoots, right before his eyes, began to grow. In a matter of moments, they transformed into long, elegant tree saplings, both still entwined about each other. But they didn't stop there. They continued to grow towards the sun, their trunks thickening as they grew. And as they did so, they encircled each other. They continued to grow towards the sun, their trunks thickening as they grew. And as they did so, they encircled each other. They put out each other's branches, tiny leaves, and even some reddish fruit, and hung in clusters. Soon what had been two delicate shoots only moments before was now two sturdy trees in full grown glory, with thick, nearly merged trunks coated around each other, their roots bulging from the mud, their lofty crowns meshed arching over the entire width of what had once been a pond. Aaron pulled himself out of the mud by one of his roots. He gazed at the two entwining trunks and the leaves overhead, which now filtered out the sun. Petal, he whispered, forgive me, forgive me. I believe my love was enough. And there in the shade of the two trees, Aaron Jewett sat and wept. By the time the sun had set and the moon had risen, spending its sprinkles of silver light through the two trees' crowns, Aaron died of a broken heart, and little green leaves fell gently to cover him. So ended Baron Wardex's tale, and Avril Whirlwind looked up from his book. He detected in one of the old man's eyes a solitary tear. The half-elf himself sighed from sadness and had to brush away from his page a teardrop or two that threatened to make his ink run. Well, I must say that is not a story I expected from a knight, he said. Baron Warrex stirred his eyes and ears once more, seeing and hearing what was before him, and when he spoke, it was once more in his own deep but tired voice. I warned you, he said. It is what has been in my heart.
With a creaking of his armour and bones, he slowly rose to his feet. Well now, it's in my book as well, said the half-elf, bloating the page, shaking off his own sadness. But as to the title, about how a tale of eternal love, no, too corny. How about a tale of two loves? You see, it's about two kinds of love, get it? Brian Warrex, not much caring what title the florist gave the story, trudging over to the flat rock where his helmet and shield were lying. Well, I'll have to give that some thought, continued Aril, tapping the quill feather against the downy chain. But the weight is most important. Should I put this story down as facts and fables? The knight put his visorless helmet and grand white moustache flowing well out of both sides like two elegant handles. The story is true enough, as far as I'm concerned. Well, I don't know, said Arrow, squinting at the page through his spectacles. It seems pretty incredible, even for the Forest of Werra. Perhaps if you have seen those entangled trees yourself, it would lend credibility. With some effort, Baron Warrex stood and lifted his heavy dull shield. My friend, all I know is that I too once had a beautiful daughter, and that one day she too reached marriageable age. I believe no better than this, Aaron Duet. Oh, I'm so sorry, said Aaron Whirlwind awkwardly, not sure how to respond to such a confession. Oh, I myself have never had children. The old knight slung the shield across his back, and he became as stooped under the weight of Arrow was under his tongue. Even as he spoke, Werex, startled, Warex, startled off down the grassy, flower-dotted valley, where butterflies filled about him, as if to cheer him. Up, it is many years since my own daughter ran away with her lover. With some effort, Baron Warrex stood and lifted his heavy dull shield. My friend, all I know is that I too once had a beautiful daughter, and that one day she too reached marriageable age. I believe no better than this Arinduet. Oh, I'm sorry, said Avril Whirlwind awkwardly. I'm not sure how to respond to such a confession. I myself have never had children. The old knight slung his shield across his back, and he became as stooped under its weight as Avril was under his tone. Even as he spoke, Baron Warrex startled off down the grassy, flowery-dotted valley, where butterflies flitted about him, as if to cheer him up. It is many years since my old daughter ran away with her lover. Avril remained perched on his rock, and trying to hear the retiring knight, he started a new page and began scribbling once more in his book. Now this old knight has but one last mission in his life, said Warwick, walking ever further off, his voice growing fainter, and this is to find my daughter and this husband of hers. And, murmured Avril, repeating the knight's words exactly as he wrote them down, give them my blessing. That was the first story from Dragonlance Tales, A Good Knight's Tale. Ian Walton.